Oh my goodness. Let's see, what day is today? It's a Monday.
We haven't podcasted in a long time,
It seems like it.
and I've really been missing it because this is such a
Yeah,
highlight. I'm so glad we were able to fit it in. We are going to try to do it yesterday. It was
yeah,
Easter. We were
yeah.
going to do it at Oceanside, and both of us were just like, we're getting too much to do the day before the race. It's hard with that Saturday race, to do a podcast on Friday.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And then I was back east
Yeah,
for this Friday, and so that would have been a super late night for me.
yeah,
But yeah, so we're gonna have a double week. We'll do
yeah,
today, and then we'll do Friday, which will be right before our club event on Saturday. So
exactly. We got to go early on Friday so we can wake up early on Saturday.
yeah, that's right. Really early. Oh man,
So
but I'll tell you what, I'm also a little tired right now because I have been on Zoom meetings almost all day, starting at 8 a.m. So,
yeah, it's weird. Like I've kind of switched my schedule a little bit, and my Monday day is my day to do meetings. And
yeah,
then today we did have a lot of like thesis defenses, and I
yeah,
had two other live meetings. It was kind of driving around town doing live meetings and
yeah.
online meetings. Actually, it's funny because you sent out a link to the Tri Club's meeting for tomorrow night.
Yep.
I was like, oh, is it tonight? I don't know if I could do.
I know.
Actually, I have another meeting after this still.
Oh, do you?
And I was
Okay.
like, oh, and then I'd have that one on top of it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I could do meetings from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. in one day.
It is exhausting just doing the meetings. It's that mental, energy that we're expending, and especially on thesis defense meetings, which are extremely important. There's a
Yeah,
lot at stake, and when we have students that are defending, that can add a little stress too because we want them to do well.
yeah.
But you also want to have a nice, stimulating conversation, and so. Boy, I'm glad I'm not racing tomorrow. That's, setting up all these meetings ahead of time.
Yeah.
That's exhausting going to into a race.
Well, it's really an interesting thing, right? As tonight we're actually going to be talking about mental fatigue in triathlon, and thinking about the mental fatigue of work. Like, I honestly think, John, if you and I were retired, our mental fatigue in triathlon would be so much lower.
Yeah, right.
But that's not reality for us right
Yeah.
now, right? So we have to try and figure out ways to mitigate it and to deal with it. And I've really not thought too much about like actually quantifying it.
Hmm.
And as I did some reading to prepare for this, like there are ways you can quantify this and then adjust your training
Hmm.
around it.
Yeah.
Even looking back at like poor race performances and seeing if that was
Hmm.
part of the issue. Like, you know, you and I both have had, I don't think we have the most stressful jobs. Like we're not like,
Yeah.
we're not firefighters out, you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
jumping into the forest and,
Yeah.
but it is still is mentally very, very fatiguing for us. And, almost all of the, I think I can contribute a lot of even my injuries to times of high stress at work,
Yeah.
you know? And, I think we all need to take a step back and try and manage this both in racing and in training.
Oh, it's spot on. And I actually have, the mental stress part actually can manifest itself in a very unhealthy way in the human body. And as you know, I've got rheumatoid arthritis, and a trigger for my rheumatoid arthritis is one of them is mental fatigue or mental stress, really. And so it is, that stress can really show up in ways that are just not predictable, and it is hard. And so we do need to have ways to manage the stress, which ultimately leads to mental fatigue, which then has a negative influence on performance as well, as we're going to talk about.
Well, and Jen, I'm so glad you brought up your RA, and obviously, it's I feel bad for you that you have this, but you're dealing with it. But it shows that there actually is a physical manifestation,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yours you can actually feel and see, but
Hmm.
everyone has something that it will affect them. And I think too often we look at stress as a badge of honor
Hmm.
rather than the negative thing it actually is, right?
Yeah.
Now we've talked about this many times that like some stress is good,
Hmm.
right? The stress response model we've talked about a lot, but I think that we do need to really kind of get away from this badge of honor. Oh yeah, well I'm tackling all these projects,
Yeah.
I'm doing all this, I'm
Right.
crushing the training, I'm doing, and maybe you don't see it or feel it in yourself, but it's still there.
Yeah.
And the research is really clear on this. It will affect your performance,
Hmm.
will affect your training over time. It might not in the
Yeah.
short, in the short term, it might not,
Hmm.
but over time, it absolutely can. And, I, like you, probably have gone through points where I probably shouldn't have trained as much
Hmm.
because of all of the stress.
Yeah.
But then in the back of our minds, and I know you and I have talked about this before, sometimes we train to help relieve the stress,
That's right.
but if you do the wrong training, it can actually add to it.
Yeah. No, you're right. There's a balance there, and you've got to figure out what you can do that's going to be positive and help manage that stress, and what you're doing that can actually be additive in terms of a negative sense of what the stress is doing. And so that is a balance, and that is, takes experience. This is where a coach can be helpful, because a coach can sometimes see things from outside your own personal bias. But if you're not coached and you're coaching yourself, you really do need to pay attention about what's working, and when there are times that you just got to say, not today's not the day, or don't do training that will just simply add to more problems, because all of a sudden you're going to find yourself dealing with an injury that you weren't really on track to get, unless you had the combination of mental stress and physical stress.
So I love the article we started looking at that kind of opened up to more articles was they title it mental fatigue. And I
Yeah.
love that word. I love that so much more than mental stress,
Hmm.
right? Because we can understand fatigue in our legs and our arms. You can even the fatigue of like sleepiness, but this is a different kind of fatigue,
Yeah.
right? So when your mind is not working
Hmm.
as well as it should. So in the research article we talked about, some of the key findings were mental fatigue can impair endurance performance,
Hmm.
can increase perceived exertion,
Yeah.
which I think is really an interesting one, affect your pacing strategy, impair decision making, and reduce technical skills. Um, if you think about those are all things that we need as triathletes to be successful.
Hmm.
And if I could, once again, if I could on all of those things change the dial 5%, I'd be so much better of a triathlete.
Hmm.
But when the dial goes the wrong way, oftentimes you don't even notice it.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah, no, total. And I think I like that distinction between mental stress and mental fatigue. Those are not synonymous.
Yeah.
One can lead to the other, but they are different concepts. And so I think you're right. And so I think it's good to even define what fatigue is. Now, one of our thesis defense meetings this morning was on fatigue, but we're talking physical fatigue. And when we start talking about muscle fatigue, we're talking about a reduction in the capability to generate force. That's typically an operational definition of fatigue. If you look up fatigue in the dictionary, though, it will just say general tiredness.
Yeah.
And actually, another way to approach defining fatigue, even in the physical world, is to use a psychological definition. And you define fatigue or fatigue is a perception of how much more you think you can do.
Yeah.
And I like that definition because it ties in nicely with what we're talking about here. If you have mental fatigue, your perception of how much more you think you can do can actually be reduced, and therefore your performance actually reduces.
I love that you brought it out like that, John, because if you think about it, a lot of people in triathlon will think of a fatigue of like doing like a half Ironman or not,
Hmm.
or a long race.
Yeah.
But the truth is, you can become fatigued in a 400-meter race,
Yeah.
right? Where you've gone, I don't know if you used to run track when you were younger. I did, and you're like 3/4 of the way around. You're like, oh, I can't go this fast anymore,
Right. Right.
right? So then my mind is telling me like I can't basically stay going at that
Yeah.
pace any
Yeah.
longer, and that's fatigue, and that's coming from, like you said, the mental side, but also the physical side. And
Hmm.
I wasn't in on that thesis this morning, but I hope that they were talking about both kind of sides of the paradigm, where you have a combination of mental and physical,
Yeah.
right? That leads to fatigue. And so tonight we're really talking about that mental side.
Yeah. No, totally. In this presentation, it was mostly on the physical side. But what was recognized is, like, let's say you just fatigue a muscle, and then someone comes behind you and startles you in some way, loud noise or whatever, and you just get that mental, or not that mental, but you just get this little rush of endorphins or what have you, and all of a sudden that muscle, which was fatigued, can actually generate more force. So it's not, the point being that even when we see a muscle decrease in the amount of force it can generate, it's not always because the muscle is not able to generate force, but it's the signal that's being sent to the muscle is changing. And so if you can change that signal, you can actually go back and generate more force.
So some of the, John, you probably know the research on this because you were on this committee, but some of the research that I read on this is literally talking about, though, that you can fatigue the muscle to the point where it can't respond, right? Like, so yes, you could be scared and it can respond, but it may not respond to the same level if it was rested, right? So it'll respond, you'll get the endorphins, you'll get a little shot of, basically it's epinephrine, right?
Yeah, right, right.
Right? You get a little shot of epinephrine, but if the muscle is completely fatigued, which let's say you did a 30K downhill run,
Yeah,
right? Your muscles are just that fatigued that they actually can't produce the same. Obviously, they can't produce the same power as before you did that run. Even if you scare the heck out of yourself, you do still have a limit that's now been taxed. Does
well,
that make sense?
spot on. I love it. But here's where I do a little demarcation of this type of work is if I take the muscle out,
Yeah,
I can stimulate that muscle outside the body to where it no longer can generate force.
exactly.
Yeah. Now we don't do that. We do that with frogs or we do that with animal. I don't, but
Yeah.
in that case, when we're actually taking the muscle out of the system and stimulating it, that level of fatigue that you're talking about is very much predictable.
Yeah.
But when we're in the body in vivo, it gets really complicated. So we both did Oceanside.
Yeah.
We got fatigued during Oceanside, but I bet you if you look at your pace in that last 100 meters, it was probably faster. So we were fatigued early in the race, but we were able to still generate more force and ultimately run faster near the end of the race because we're excited. We're there.
Yeah. But I tell you what, my last K was still not as fast as my first K.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. So yes, I was excited. And when I actually looked at this, I'm like, well, what was that last mile? Because I know I sped up on the last mile. Part of it's because it's dead flat at that section. Part of it is it's the beautiful ocean.
Yeah.
On the side. But then I looked at it, I'm like, my first 2 miles were faster than my last mile.
Yeah.
And I'm still fatigued at that point, right? Because I just got off of the bike. And John, you're probably familiar with that stuff. It was done, I don't know, like 15, 20 years ago, where they did the femoral nerve innervations, where in vivo, right? Or they actually stimulated the femoral nerve. I think they did some kind of like epidural into the spine. So basically, your brain wasn't no longer connected to your legs, and they could get to a point where they could basically reduce the amount that you can contract by stimulating with electricity directly into the femoral nerve. So yeah, but anyways, we're kind of getting off track because that's the physical side, right? And like I said, there's both sides, and I think oftentimes in triathlon we get caught up in the physical side, and we don't think of the mental fatigue. So let me give you an example. So we talked about this before. If I don't sleep the night before a race, or even 2 nights before a race, there's a lot more mental fatigue going on, right? There's physical fatigue, but when you're laying in bed, even for those 8 hours, you're not moving your legs, right? So you can actually get a little bit of rest. But if your mind's continually active, I mean, there's evidence, there's a lot of evidence out there that you don't perform as well when you're actually mentally fatigued. And I think the same thing is if you are racing around because your bike is broken, right? The day before the race, and you notice a bolt is broken, and you're running around town trying to get that fixed, and you're stressed out, and you don't race as well the next day. And so we've talked about things like getting to races early, like showing up a couple days before, and how that's better than showing up the night before as far as as far as mental fatigue. And this is just on racing, right? This is not getting into even training and reducing the mental fatigue around training.
Yeah, no, and that's this thing about fatigue. It's a whole body issue, and it's very complicated. And it is the physical part, but it's also the mental part. It's a perception of how much more you can do. And even during a race, you have a perception that's less than what you can do. And so you start slowing down, but then you can still recover and change that because you've changed your mental approach. And before a race, spot on. It is so important not to walk to the start line where you're mentally fatigued. And if you're mentally fatigued at the start line, you're setting yourself up for a really long day.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's tell our quick stories about Oceanside and our mental fatigue. So I got to be honest with you. I made a very, very poor decision on race morning, and
What was that?
I'm still beating myself up about it. It was to take the shuttle.
Yeah, that's right.
We walked from the transition zone to our house the day before, timed it. It's going to be 25 minutes. We planned, hey, leave the house at 5:20, get to transition at 5:45, plenty of time.
Mm-hmm.
Tons and tons of time. And then we're like, well, in the morning we looked at the little map and it said, oh, there's this shuttle. It's only 2 blocks from our house. Oh, well, shoot. Well, I've been on lots of race shuttles, especially Ironman race shuttles, and they're always quick. It's like, hey, they load up quick, they get there quick, they go right to the start. To make a long story short, we didn't get to the transition zone till 6:20.
No.
And we were at the bus stop at 5:22 probably.
And transition closed at?
It closed at 6:30.
Yep.
Right. But the mental stress of waiting in line for that bus, not knowing if it's coming, there's a bunch of people in line, there's 100 people in line, getting on the bus trip took about 35 minutes to go 1.1 miles.
Yeah.
Right. Or 1.2 miles. People on the bus yelling at the bus driver, demanding to be let off, saying that they were being kidnapped and they were going to call the police. Right. The poor bus driver, and I'm just sitting there like and actually, believe it or not, I'm trying to mitigate the stress. I'm trying to do some breathing exercises, trying to do some mindfulness training.
Yeah.
But then we get there and then they drop us off. It's like 400, 500 meters at least from where they dropped us off to the transition area. We're running.
Mm-hmm.
I get to the transition area and they're already announcing, hey, you got to get out of transition. Transition closes in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I got to pump my tires. I got to, get everything set up. And it's, it set my day up to be horrible.
Yeah.
And, I had some issues in the swim that I also attribute to not having the time I would normally had. I had goggle issues, which I probably would have worked out if I had the time.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, and John, this is the only time this ever happened to me, is I was halfway out in the swim and I was having an absolute horrible time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm quitting triathlon.
Yeah.
I literally said that I do not want to do this anymore. There's no fun in this.
Right.
I was frozen.
Mm.
I was shivering as I was swimming, and it was cold.
Yeah.
Shivering, and I'm like, if there was a boat right now, right here, I would get on it.
Yeah.
And my swim was probably the worst 70.3 timed swim I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so defeated. But I think the funny thing is this is mental fatigue, I think, right? Like all of that stress, and we talked about endorphins, the endorphins that were going off at 6, 6:10, 6:20, 6:30 as they're kicking us out of transition. I still don't have my bike computer on my bike, all of those stresses, they limit the amount of I have still to give.
Yeah.
And, even on the bike, the first half of the bike, I was still upset.
Mm-hmm.
And I, upset at myself too at that point. Cause I'm like, why would I say these things to myself?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I have this negative self-talk? I love triathlon. I love this lifestyle. I was so happy to be in Oceanside the day before.
Mm-hmm.
See all of our friends. I mean, John, we had such a good day the day before. all the Tri-Cult people were there, and we
Yeah,
had some
that was great.
hangouts. It was awesome.
Hmm.
And then I'm on the bike and I'm negative about being negative,
Yeah.
right? And these things, they manifested throughout the day
Hmm.
to not a great race for me.
Yeah.
And I don't blame anybody. I blame myself.
Mhm.
And I blame some of my coping strategies that I'm gonna work on. But
Right.
anyhow, that's my story. Let's talk about your story of standing in the start at Oceanside.
Well, one, I think it's good to realize that the number of races that you've done and that I've done, it's going to happen that you're going to have those times where something just isn't clicking correctly. And it is hard to get out of those spots. And I would say that given the number of races both of us have done, we generally do a good job with getting out of those spots. But every now and then, it's just hard, and we all struggle with it. So my struggle at Oceanside was, I got there on time. I walked to the start. I didn't take the shuttle, but everything was going well. Everything, planning wise was good. It was a cold morning though, and it was a very damp, humid, cold morning. So anyways, I got in my wetsuit. I got in the queue to start, and I was in a good spot for the queue, and I just found myself just shivering, and I was not pleased with that. Why didn't I bring something for my feet that I would throw away? Why am I getting myself set up to be cold and shivering, and I wasn't ready for this? And so I had a very negative reaction at that point too. And I told you afterwards, I almost walked away.
Yep.
He's like, I don't want to start. And but fortunately I was in the line, and just wasn't ready to fully turn around and walk away. But I was already approaching that start line with a very a defeatist type of attitude, and that's not good. Usually, I pride myself on the start saying, hey, this is what I do. This is what I enjoy doing. Get that start line and go. And I did not do that. And so it was a frustrating start to the swim. But then, we just get going, and we try to find that groove. And unfortunately, I also had a terrible time navigating that course. And I've done that harbor swim course before, and for whatever reason, I just have a hard time navigating that course. It just are not things that I can cite, or I'm just not picking up the right line to swim. I'm, basically swam past a buoy that was supposed to be turning, and it was just very much like you. I was like, what am I doing? I'm not getting into a groove. And so ultimately exited the swim, looked at my time, and I was like, it was a good time. But at the same time, I was, frustrated at that point with not being able to navigate well. Fortunately, at that point, I was able to sort of gather my thoughts and get back into the race. And so I felt, some success at that point, because I just ignore the swim. Whatever it is, it is. And I'm sure other people were struggling as well with the temperature, or with the pre-race temperature, or even the water temperature. And I just had to keep telling myself, I'm not alone in that, and I now just need to focus on where I'm at now. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to recover a bit, even by the time I got to my bike, and then felt that I could get back into the race at that point.
So, I mean, I gotta be honest with you, like the manifestation of my mental issue, I felt it, like I said, on the bike, my legs were hurting more than they normally hurt. Like I know, like, yeah, I've
Yeah,
some
yeah, yeah,
discomfort
yeah. Right.
I'm like, this is an unusual
Yeah.
discomfort based off of the taper I had.
Yeah.
The day before his bike ride, I was
Mhm.
felt way better.
Yeah.
But once again, this is the manifestation of that,
Yeah.
is you're not able to basically withstand the same amount of
Right.
discomfort. And like these are lessons that we have to learn. The only other time I can kind of remember my legs being having that much discomfort was at the Oregon 70.3 a couple of years ago when I forgot my wetsuit at the house.
Oh, that's right. You had to run back.
And I had to drive back and then run to the start. And it's funny because like that's the only other time I remember my legs feeling like that at the wattage I wanted to do, like that I knew I could do. And so now I'm kind of putting these things together. I'm like, okay, I got to dial in my morning a lot better, because that feeling, it limited the power output. And the crazy thing is, like, my power output was low and my heart rate was low. Right. So I know I've got a lot more to give, but because this pain in my legs was telling me to go slower. And it's one thing, it's more of a mental thing, right?
Well, okay, so that's what I was just going to say. There's two parts to that. One is there was a true physical manifestation of fatigue. You're standing in the start line, you're shivering. That burns calories more so than not shivering. And you're in the water and you're cold. And I know that you had issues with goggles, and you ended up getting more cold in that swim than if you just swam the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so, there was a real physical manifestation of what you were going through. But then the other part is the mental part, and that's the perception of how much more we feel we can do, or what pace we can even sustain. And that is based upon a lot of things, not just your, sensing what's happening at muscles, but also that mental part. And that is, so there's the two parts to it, and they're both real. Neither, and it's not bad to have either one. But I think the mental one is one that we can continue to try to build up that skill set to deal with.
So let's talk about how we can reduce mental fatigue, both around training and around racing. And once again, I did some research and some reading on this. And once again, I wish we'd have this talk 2 weeks before Oceanside. Well, actually, I don't, because honestly, this becomes more real now. I'm really recognizing personally how impactful this can be.
Yeah, right.
So there are strategies that we can take in place to reduce mental fatigue. And, once again, going back to the thing of, like life is stressful and everyone has stress, but there are actually things that we can do. I don't know, John, have you messed around with any like mindfulness stuff, visualization?
Oh, very much so. The skill, we had Dr. Brad Donahue on here talking about that. I really think having that mental skill toolbox built up is so important. And you got to have more than one tool. And because I have had races where it was a mental breakdown, and that I look back on those and I'm more upset with that than when it's a physical breakdown. You think, because you think you can prepare yourself for it, but they're real, and it's not easy. So so let's talk about the mental skill toolbox that you can dip into when we run into these race situations.
Well, I think everybody probably knows about positive self-talk, and we spent a lot of time with Brad talking about that. But like doing mindfulness training, I used to do mindfulness training. I don't really do a lot of it anymore. I think I probably need to add that back in. So there's, if you don't know what mindfulness is, it's actually being in the moment. It's not thinking of the past. It's not thinking of the future. It's literally just thinking of right now. So a lot of people do like breath skills and breath work. There's lots of apps that you can use. There's on YouTube that you can do. Probably the most popular app, I think, is called Headspace.
Oh yeah.
One that I used, but it can definitely, there's some good research that doing mindfulness training can reduce stress. And I always kind of think about it like, when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're thinking about the day mistake you made, or you're thinking about work for tomorrow and the meetings you have, that's not being mindful, right? Like that's thinking the future or thinking the past instead of thinking in the now. And when I can really focus and think of the now, I fall back asleep, right? Because I'm reducing that stress. Do you do mindfulness training?
Not in that sense, but I think some of the practices I have would probably fall in that category. Even the night before, what kind of music are you listening to? What type of movie are you watching if you're watching a movie? And I've got things that I like to do. I remember I'm drawing a blank on his name, but we interviewed him on our podcast, and he talked before his race he would listen to classical music. as opposed to that music that, really ramps you up. Well, a lot of times you don't want to be ramped up, just like, shivering before a race ramps you up. You don't want to be, you want to be calm for an endurance race, 17.3 or a full or even Olympic. I mean, you want to be calm, you want to be ready to go and be ready to sustain your effort for, a good number of hours.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the last thing you want to do is be over amped before a long distance race.
Yeah, yeah,
Once again, you're increasing mental fatigue,
right.
in something that's going to be mentally really challenging. Whereas, if you're going to do like a powerlifting contest,
Hmm.
that's quick and hard, or a sprint race, or not a sprint triathlon, like an actual sprinting race,
Right.
I think that can be more effective.
Hmm.
Once again, you're at the gym and you're trying to lift really heavy.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
there's evidence to support that. But I agree with you. I think that music is important.
Hmm.
You in that, and like I said, the other choices you make to try and keep it mellow.
Hmm. Hmm.
I know some people in the morning of a race, they don't want to talk to anybody.
Yeah, yeah, right.
They just want to, and part of it is just talking to people can be stressful,
Yeah.
right? You feel like you got to be on, and
Hmm.
or and even in the transition zone
Hmm.
be really stressful. So I was talking to somebody that was their first big race, like first 70.3,
Yeah,
and they were blown away by the nervous energy,
yeah, right.
right? Now, obviously my nervous energy was off the
Yeah,
chart with that race, but in general, in a big race,
yeah.
even a small local race, like Rage is coming up, and there's a
Hmm.
lot of nervous energy.
Yep.
People are nervous of the swim. They don't know if they can do it. It's going to be
Hmm.
cold. They're nervous of the bike, or they're not a good runner, or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of energy, and even the tone of people when you're talking can
Yeah.
actually increase your nervous energy.
Hmm.
So, I think moving forward on a bigger race, I need to really think about that
Hmm.
personally, and maybe just go sit somewhere.
Yeah.
And I've had some really good races where there was a big time between you set up your transition and when you raced.
Hmm.
A few were like a couple hours, like US Nationals a couple of times has been a couple of hour wait,
Hmm.
and just going to sit somewhere quiet
Yeah.
and just keep it mellow. And then I've had a good race.
Hmm.
So I think that's something that maybe for me, my next 70.3 coming up, I think I'm really going to make a concerted effort to set my transition area up and then just go somewhere
Yeah.
like by myself.
Hmm.
Maybe not even have music on, because there's music playing in the transition zone usually, but just find a place that I can reduce my stress
Hmm.
and do visualization and do mindfulness and positive self-talk, which we've talked about before. Like, I don't know why I didn't go there,
Hmm.
right? Because I know about positive self-talk, and I went negative,
Right, right.
and not negative, like negative, right? Like, quit the sport negative, not like I hate you. Like,
Yeah.
right? Because we've all been there too. Oh, you're terrible. You hate yourself.
Yeah,
It
right.
wasn't. I didn't even hate myself. I hated
Mm.
the situation I was in. I hated
Yeah.
the sport. Yeah. And
It,
and I could have easily went to the other side and be like, hey man, you've been here before. This
yep.
is your fifth time racing Oceanside. You
Hmm.
knew it was going to be cold. You
Hmm.
knew it's going to be hard. You knew it's going to be challenging. Like, you can do this. Like, you can find somebody's feet. You can get back into your rhythm.
Yep.
Yeah, you gave up a couple minutes with your goggles. It doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Like, but I didn't go there, and
Yeah.
I'm upset with myself now for not going there. But now, once again, learning from my mistake, I think, is important.
It's hard, and getting once you go over that threshold
Yeah.
of the mental aspect, it's hard to come back. And we talk about having dark space, dark, moments in races, especially Ironman or 70.3. It's hard to get out of that, and so fortunately, I've been there several times, so I've had a lot of practice with trying to get out of those dark spots. And it is not easy, and like I said before, sometimes you don't, sometimes that's the more disappointing race experience, is when you can't get out of that negative thought. So I got to read a couple of comments. Candace actually commented on here. So she says, sometimes I literally have to tell myself out loud to stop it. You are creating these problems. Then I imagine a light switch and I mentally visualize flipping a giant switch, and then I'm good. Yeah, I actually do a lot of talking out loud as well. And it is, I don't know why the out loud part matters, but it does seem to sort of reset certain things. So even as I said, I got out of the swim, I just, oh, forget it. Don't worry about it. Everyone else is dealing with it. You just go through these little snippets and you do try to recapture that mind sweat. And then she adds sometimes visualizing a switch and me flipping it has instantly turned my pain off. Sounds crazy, but I swear it works, and I love it. I think that type of thing is really important. And so, and then she goes on and even talks about visualizing a giant switch on the bike. Sits so long that when doubt climbs in for me, trying to get out of that doubt is really having some skills to do that. And she's describing a skill set that works for her.
No, and that's a mental, building the mental toolbox, right?
Yep.
Is figuring that stuff out, and figuring out what works for you is critical if you want to be successful long term in endurance sports. No, I
Mhm.
agree. Yep.
And something we've talked about before was even going into the race, having recalibrating your expectations and goals for that day is an important skill to be able to have.
And it is interesting too when you think about like the expectations. So I downplayed the race because I've been injured,
Hmm.
um and I think that was part of the problem, like me downplaying it, because I really had no expectations.
Yeah,
So then it was easier to quit.
yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like as I'm swimming, like, well, I'm probably not going to run anyways.
Hmm.
So, and if I do run, it's not going to be good. So what
Hmm.
difference does it make how good the swim is?
Right.
And there's like in my mind now, there's no excuse. I've been swimming,
Hmm.
right? There's no excuse. But so now I'm like thinking, I need to overhype myself. Like instead
Yeah.
of being wasn't negative self-talk about the race
Right.
beforehand, I need to be okay. Like if I'm gonna do it and it's gonna be okay. And I know I haven't trained as well as I should, but I still we've talked about this before, on the day, getting the most I can out of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, it's something it's good to prepare for some of this, and you could do something, and you never know how it's going to work. Let's go through a couple of examples of what does work.
Yeah.
Um, positive statements. I like that you mentioned. Sometimes I've written on my hand some little phrase that I can just quickly look at, and I should remind myself at that time because I wrote it on my hand or something, in terms of why I'm there and why I'm racing, or some type of token. I've done wristbands or sweatband or things that I can then look at and say, oh, that's right. This is, just a little reminder about, why I'm doing this and why I'm here and what I'm hoping to do. And sometimes for me, having a physical manifestation, some type of token can actually help.
Oh, I agree, and I need to probably do more of that. Writing a positive message on the bike, like
Hmm.
somewhere on my bike I can look to.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people do that. I
Yeah.
don't. I've never done that, but I think I need to do that. The other one that I like that I read somebody else posted somewhere was when you're in a triathlon, just imagine that everyone that's cheering is cheering for you,
Yeah.
right? Even though they're not saying your name and they don't know you and they're cheering for somebody else, just imagine that they're cheering for you.
Yeah.
And sometimes they are and sometimes they're not, but like just whatever that is, like that positiveness of people out there. And we're lucky at big triathlons. There's usually a lot of people
Yeah. Yeah.
out there, supporting and cheering. And at this race, I didn't have any family there, but there was some fans, and it was Dr. Hansen's staff was there,
Oh, yeah. That's right.
and so they were on a really good section,
Yeah.
and I saw them 4 times, and
Yeah.
and I didn't know where I knew they're going to be there, but they've helped me with a lot of different stuff, and
Yeah.
I feel a real connection to a couple of them. And when I came down around the corner and I saw them, I mean, it buoyed my spirit so much. And I've told them
Hmm.
this, subsequently. And they, every time I saw them, it was just like,
Yeah.
hey, like,
Yeah.
go Ted, go. I'm like,
Oh,
why can't I not get that same feeling with some stranger
yeah.
that's cheering for me? Because people are cheering
Mm.
along the way, right?
Yeah.
And I need to kind of tap into that. For me personally, I think that's going to be a good thing moving forward.
Having spectators there makes a huge difference, and having people cheering you on is good too, because it is one of those things that you look forward to seeing the
Yeah.
person at whatever corner or wherever, and you're like, oh yeah, no, this is a little pick me up. Again, that's that mental part. It has nothing. It's not a physical part. That's a mental part that sort of refreshes you and gets you back into that mindset that no, I can hold this pace, so I can do that.
So it also happened when I saw you.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've got that on my list. Yeah,
Seeing other people and other people you care about. Like
yeah,
when I saw you, John,
yeah.
the first time I saw you, I was so happy.
Hmm.
Not for me, but for you. Because like I know I know where you start in the swim. I know where I am. And
Yeah.
like, and you had such a good race. And I was just like, oh my gosh, John is crushing it. And it made me feel like part of your
Yeah,
journey is part of my journey, I
yeah,
think,
yeah,
the connections that we have. And then the second time I saw you, I wasn't gaining on you.
yeah,
And I'm a little bit faster runner than you
yeah, yeah, totally.
traditionally. And I'm
Hmm.
like, oh my gosh, like
Hmm.
John is crushing it.
Hmm.
And then the third time I saw you, you'd actually gained a little bit more.
Uh,
And I'm like, oh my gosh, John is on a burner. I am so
uh,
excited for him. He's going to go to Finland with me. We're going to have such a
mhm.
good time and all those positive
Yeah, yeah,
things. So you can gain
yeah,
positive things off of
yeah.
other people's successes as well,
Hmm.
right? If
Yeah.
you care about them.
Hmm.
uh, yeah, I was honestly like just thrilled to the moon when I saw you.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. And no, that is fun. And I've done a lot of racing where I just go on my own, but I really enjoy when we go with a group and you can see each other along the way. Most of the time, and sometimes you miss each other, but it really is a pick me up. And it was fun because we both were wearing the same Tri Club kit, and it
Yeah,
was easy to pick each other out as we were going along, and that is a pick me up for sure.
yeah, and you got to take those little wins, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You see your friends out there
yeah.
and they're doing well. You see it in their face, or you know their
Mhm.
pace, and you got to take those wins.
Yeah.
We've talked about this a lot. Like you and I are trying really hard to build community around
Mhm.
triathlon in
Mhm.
Las Vegas. It's one of the reasons we do this podcast,
Yeah.
and we have to take those as wins when the
Yeah.
community does well. And at that race, a lot of people from Las Vegas had great days,
Yeah. No, they
and
did. That was really neat.
it was super neat. And you know it made me even think like, man, I should go to St. George, not to race but just to watch, like
Yeah, right.
to keep developing the community and being part of that. It's we often complain in Las Vegas that there's no community here, but then we don't do anything
Mhm.
about it.
Right. No, we've
But
we've got a great endurance community. But to that point, I think the other thing that I like to do during a race to help myself out is think of volunteer. I know that sounds very cliche, but
oh yeah,
they're out there doing something that is taking up their time. They're not getting the finisher medal. They're not getting the shirt. They're not getting the glory of racing, but yet they're out there volunteering. And I do try to turn around, especially if I'm getting really down, is to try to say a thank you here and there, and it does help me as well as it I hopefully helps them and see that we appreciate them.
yeah. No, for sure. So let's talk briefly about how we can kind of monitor our mental fatigue, and because I think that that's the kind of like the next step. And there's some questionnaires out there and some scales out there. And if you monitor it over time, you can actually kind of create a map for yourself of when you're
Hmm.
too fatigued, and maybe that's when you need to back off training. Um, and as even like in your taper week, if the day before you're scoring, if you do it every day, you score high. I think that there's some evidence to this stuff. And once again, you can find these scales on the internet. There's simple things like a visual analog scale where you're just like basically it's kind of like the thing you go to the hospital and they give you the thing of, well, between 1 and 10, how do you
Right.
feel? It could be something literally as simple as that. You wake up in the morning or you do it before you go to bed. You just, today I'm this, and you
Hmm.
chart it day after day after
Yeah.
day. There is something called the Profile of Mood States questionnaire, which once
Hmm.
again free on the internet. There's the Brunel Mode Scale, which you can get, and all of these once again these things. If you're struggling with this, or you think you're struggling with this, just can kind of give you a score, and then
Hmm.
maybe can, let you know that when things are kind of going the
Hmm.
wrong direction.
Hmm.
I think that that's important. And then, thinking if you're improving your score, keep doing what you're doing.
Hmm.
If the score is not improving, like finding things like we talked about with, how you deal with stress. And then there's actually even like brain training exercises that you can do. Once again, all these
Hmm.
things are once again, we're living this information age where all these things are
Yeah.
out there. um and if it gets to a point where like you can't, I mean, there's people like, Dr. Brad Donahue that
Hmm.
we've talked to, and there are different mental health coaches that are specifically around sports performance, sports
Hmm.
psychologists in Las Vegas that you can reach out to, or even online. you know we're living in this age where we can do telehealth, and a lot of sports psychologists will see patients on telehealth. And I think that we do need to take advantage of those expertise, those experts in that area, if this is something that you need to deal with.
Hmm. Oh, that's great. And I don't monitor mine with those tools, but they're great. But at the same time, I monitor that. But I also, try to pay attention to, when I meet multiple people in a day that I just don't, are sort of jerks to me or what have you. I know that that's usually a first sign that something's wrong with me because it's my perception. And race morning, we were talking about that. Um, it, I try not to get into any complaining because it's so easy to be so negative right from the beginning, and yeah, it's hard. And but yeah, and so some of those tools will help identify where your strengths are, where you might need some help. But I haven't used them. Have you used them at all in your regular training?
So I used to do it in, I don't, I've done it in a while, but in Training Peaks, where you could just
Yeah,
put the faces,
yeah.
right? So you can do like a scale of 1 to 10 of how hard the training is, but then also have like a visual analog scale of the faces.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the people that I coach, I have them do it, especially if they're having, more of the stress stuff
Mm-hmm.
going on. They can have like a physically good day, but then then they do the face, and the face is
Yeah,
not a good score, right?
right, right.
And that kind of, and if they do it regularly over time, and you're seeing like sad faces all the time,
Yeah, right.
right, you can start to paint a picture. And I like things like Training Peaks, where actually it's built into it, and every day you can just,
Mm-hmm.
once again, go into that visual analog scale. I
Yeah.
know some people, they use those faces to say how the training was. I
Mm-hmm.
prefer to use the faces as how's your day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that if you have a coach that can monitor that for you and can start to see some trends over time, and once again, you can create in Training Peaks, if you've got the premium account, goes to
Mm-hmm.
premium stuff, you can actually create a graph of your mental state for a month, a year,
Mm-hmm.
and start to really build a picture. And I think a lot of people use Training Peaks or use something like that that has
Yeah.
that ability.
I
Yeah.
use Training Peaks, but I skip over that part, which I probably should not be. I probably should actually be
I
using.
think I need to get back into it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I try to, I kind of try to take a shortcut and use like, the Aura Ring or something like that. But that really doesn't do the mental side.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that I probably need to do that as well. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's something I'll do between now and my next big race
Mm-hmm.
is start to monitor that. Yeah. A few other little things that we were going to talk about were some external factors. And
Mm-hmm.
number one, like really nutrition and hydration.
Yeah.
Those can tax your system as well. If you're
Mm-hmm.
constantly dehydrated or constantly undernourished, and I know we've talked a lot about that in the past as well, but it actually can add stress to the system as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it can add mental stress. I know in particular when people are trying to lose weight as they train. I'd read an article on this a while ago that was actually saying that part of the stress that's associated with that is not just the physical of like not having enough nutrients, but it's the mental stress of being hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And that once again adds to the stress bucket and
Yeah.
adds to the mental fatigue, because you're having to put energy into thought processes of dealing with hunger.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something those are the kind of low hanging fruit that you need to take care of if you're trying to up your mental game.
The one thing I enjoy about camping at races is I have to pack a lot of my own food.
Yeah.
And when we travel to races, it's really important to be very purposeful in terms of what you're going to eat race week,
Yeah.
what foods you have available to you, even for breakfast on race morning. And so the nice thing about camping is I have to plan all that out. But even when I'm traveling to a race, I didn't camp at Oceanside. I took a lot of my own food. And, when we go to Finland, which is going to be a lot of fun, I'll be taking a lot of my own food until, as the main thing to be able to have a sort of a comfort with nutrition going into a race. So it is that's good to really sort of plan out well before you head out for a race.
I think you're making a mistake by bringing food to Finland because the pickled herring over there for breakfast.
Yeah, I
Oh,
know.
I
Yeah,
think you're gonna be missing out on the pickled herring. I mean, you
yeah.
spent some time in
Oh,
Norway and you
yeah,
get the pickled fish for breakfast. It's really good.
yeah,
I don't know about pre-race, but
yeah, yeah. Pickled herring before. Yeah, yeah. When we went through Norway, we ran across those types of breakfasts too, and
yeah,
yeah, it's a little different.
it is a little different. Well, the last thing we'll talk about, John, is number one, congratulations on qualifying for Finland.
Well, thanks, and glad to join you for getting there.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm kind of over the moon that because at first I was like, well, it's gonna be Candace is listing, so it's gonna be Candace and myself. And there's no other brother. I like
Yeah,
Candace. We're gonna have a
yeah,
great time. She was the only person from the club that I knew that was gonna be going. But now after Oceanside, a bunch of us are going,
yeah.
and it's gonna be honestly, it's gonna be an epic adventure,
Yeah.
and it's really made me a lot more excited to go. So
Yeah, no, it'd be fun, and who knows, maybe we'll get a few more at St. George.
exactly, I'm
There's a very
hopeful,
good
and
chance.
or Oregon.
Yeah, yeah,
Oregon's
yeah,
still,
that's
I
right.
think Oregon's the last qualifier, I
Yeah.
think. So
Well, it's fun, when you do those international races. I've done them, on my own, but it's also fun when you go with a group uh, just to share the experience.
yeah,
But at the same time, this is where, in terms of this topic, the mental fatigue, I think everyone just needs to be prepared for what that week is going to look like. And you have to be okay with saying, okay, this is now my time to go do something. And we'll talk more about that, with the group especially. But there are times where traveling with a group is a lot of fun, but we also have to be very mindful of what each of us are there for.
yeah. Well, I'm there for a good time.
Yeah, there you
I
go.
gotta be honest with you, like that will not be my A race of the year. That's
Yeah,
gonna be my race to go have fun,
yeah,
see Finland.
yeah.
You know, I've been to lots of world championships, and this is not one that I think I can be on the podium or anything.
Right,
So
right.
it's time. So much, and I have been in the past, but it's not going to be this year, and that's fine. But go have fun, like that's my thing, and
Mhm,
yeah, like it's fun to go to a race like a big time championship race like that with that mindset of just go
mhm.
have a good time
Yeah, yeah,
and make that week something memorable. Because like when we went to Austria, John, like that's still one of my fondest memories. Because we had a big group
yeah,
that
yeah,
were all in Austria
yeah,
together. And that whole week was just fun. And even afterwards, like hanging out afterwards, like I think we went up to the glacier. Remember the day after we took a big cable car up to the top of a
yeah,
glacier.
yeah. That was great.
It was
Yeah.
awesome. Like
Mhm.
those are those are memories that we'll hopefully have for a long time. And no, it's gonna be great. And not that our memories from Oceanside weren't great. Like our
Yeah.
memories from Oceanside, even though the race didn't go as well,
Mhm.
the day before was one of my favorite triathlon days we've ever had.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. No, that was good.
and even sitting around the roll down, like I already had my spot, and I'm sitting there
Yeah,
like just almost so nervous energy, hoping people got spots.
yeah.
And it's like it's fun, right? When you're with a group and other you're feeding off of other people's enjoyment and excitement. So yeah,
Well, and again, I think that's part of your mental skill, not yours, but everyone's mental skill toolbox is to remember those memories and to tap into that when you need to race morning or some segment of the day or because it is so easy to fall down a real negative spiral.
awesome. Well, John, this is a great talk. I thoroughly enjoyed it. We got a short turnaround. We'll do another one on Friday night.
Yeah,
And I hope you have a mentally healthy week.
That's right. Time to rest up. All right,
Although
thanks.
we're gonna get ready for a tri-club race. It's not gonna be a mental
Oh,
thing.
that's right. Oh, it's gonna be,
Never mind.
yeah, it's gonna be good.
The week after will be mentally.
That's right.
Okay.
All right, good talking.
You too. We'll talk to you soon.
All
Bye.
right, bye.